Hello and welcome to my Minesweeper efficiency guessing guide. In this video, I'm going to cover different situations where you may want to guess when playing for efficiency and go over when and how you would want to guess to maximize your potential. When you play for efficiency, you get to a point pretty soon where you need to take risks to take your game to the next level. Often, the best possible move for efficiency requires taking a guess, but if you were to guess every time it would be useful, you would almost never be able to win a game. So you need to consider the risks involved with guessing and judge if the reward is worth it to you. The higher your aspirations are, the more you're going to need to guess, but understanding the value of each guess you could make will help determine when it's worth it for you. In order to know how to guess efficiently, you'll need to know how to guess well in general. Most of the guesses I'll be covering in this guide will either be floating cells or cells that are just as likely to be safe as a floating cell. This video will not cover how to calculate probabilities, but I will show them on screen using calculations done by MS Coach's board analyzer. If you're confused about how these are determined, and you're looking for more information about how to gauge probabilities and learn about guessing for yourself, I recommend reading guides by Coro or Teamworm listed in the description, or checking out some of MindBoy's videos to get a better understanding. Guessing principles. When deciding to implement guessing into Minesweeper games, there are a few principles I like to follow to be as effective as possible when playing a little bit more risky. These are: Principle 1, go for safe guesses. When you start guessing for high efficiency games, you usually don't want to go too crazy with it. This will mean going for guesses that are more likely than not to be safe, instead of risking everything on calling a tile that has a 10 to 50% chance of being a mine. If you go for plays that have an 80% chance of working out, you could, for example, do it 3 times per game and expect to live all of them over 50% of the time. Principle 2, guess early. If you're going to make a guess, it's ideal if you get it over with as soon as is practical. You don't want to waste more time than necessary by blasting a guess at the end, so if you see a good opportunity to make a guess early on, it's better to take it sooner rather than later. Principle 3, go for high value guesses. You want to be sensible with your guesses. If the upside of going for a guess isn't much better than going for an alternative move that's likely to be just as efficient, then there's no sense in taking the unnecessary risk. Evaluate the potential gain to be made for making each guess and decide if it's worth it for the level you're playing at. And principle 4 is don't be afraid to blast. Sometimes you'll get to a point where you're stuck without any moves that are very valuable from an efficiency standpoint. And when you encounter this situation, it's sometimes best to take a small risk, even if you feel like you're on a good pace already. It can be daunting to possibly throw away a very good game to an unnecessary guess, but if you're going to squander it all away anyway by wasting a bunch of clicks to avoid the guess, it could be better just to take the chance. Now, let's get into some example guessing situations. Part 1, safe guesses. The first type of scenario I'm going to cover are situations where you can make a guess that is likely to be safe. Consider this opening on Expert. There are several moves you can make here that are guaranteed to be safe, but none of these are particularly useful in terms of potentially saving clicks. So we can instead think about moves that would be more useful if we were to guess. One move that you might think looks tempting would be to assume this tile here in the bottom left corner is a mine and to flag and chord that. While it could be a good move if it works out, clearing out 4 tiles with a single chord and setting up for potential follow-ups, the chance of this tile actually being a mine is very low at only 12%, so I would not recommend it in this case. Instead, I'll look to the area in the bottom right. The way these tiles are arranged, it's actually very likely that these 3 cells are all mines, so you can flag one of them and be right 80% of the time. I'd recommend flagging one of these cells and using them to chord. The most immediately useful place to flag would be in the middle, and then chording the ones first to the left, and then depending on the follow-up from that, chording to the right of it as well. This can save a click by chording at least twice off of the single flag. The next example I want to look at is in this bottom left corner here. Again, we have a situation where this cell is pretty likely to be a mine, and with no other safe moves in this corner that are likely to help us, it would be a good idea to flag it and use it to chord. Even though we have safe moves elsewhere on this board that could be useful too, we want to get this corner done first because of the guess early principle. I would recommend flagging here and chording this 2 to clear these 3 cells above it. Let's say we do that and we end up in a situation like this. Continuing on with this example, we find ourselves in a situation where we'd like to chord this 2 here with one of these squares to the left, but we don't have any idea where the mine would be, nor any way of making efficient progress otherwise. So we want to opt for an info click to learn more about the potential mine layout. The cell up on the top left is a good candidate because it's guaranteed safe and won't be cleared by any efficient chords at this stage. If we're lucky, we get a 3 here and have guaranteed info for where the mine is and can chord it right away. But in the event we aren't so lucky, maybe we get a 2 instead. The chord we wanted to do with the 3 is still the most likely scenario, but not really high enough for us to be confident. So we can continue to fish for more info without wasting a click here by now clearing this square. Now with the 4 here, this cell to the left of the 2 is significantly more likely to be mine, or we can confidently flag it for a powerful chord. There are many possibilities that can arise when going for guesses, so just keep in mind when going for them to look for any info clicks or obligatory chords that you can make that could tell you more about the possibilities for any relevant mines, especially when they don't cost you any potential clicks, and do those first before committing to any kind of risky moves. The last case I want to cover for this part involves this scenario. This tile here is pretty likely to be a mine, so we can flag it and chord to make progress. But the question becomes, how should we proceed? We could either chord like this, aka a split chord, or like this. So which way is better? The difference between these moves comes down to whether we want to uncover this top tile or this bottom one. Let's start by looking at how likely we are to get a follow-up chord from each tile we uncover. Starting with the middle tile, that would be revealed either way, assuming our initial mine placement is correct, the chance for every tile around this one being safe is 0.8 cubed, or about 51%. The chance for this top one having an immediate follow-up is better at 64%, and for the bottom one, it's somewhat more unlikely at only 42%. Note that these probabilities are not independent. A single mine in the wrong place could mess up multiple cases of being able to make progress. Now you may think the lower chance of getting a follow-up chord is made up for by the potential of having a really big one, but how valuable would that chord be really? Let's consider an example where we go for this chord, and we get the 1 here. What's likely to happen if we chord it? Well, first of all, in this specific example, we aren't any better off than if we had gone for the split chord in the first place, because now this tile doesn't have any way of being cleared except for with a single click, so we aren't saving any by going for this. And then another major concern when going for chords like this is the risk of hitting an opening, wasting our big chord by not clearing any CBVs. In this case, the risk comes from these cells here potentially being zeros, which would make this chord go into an opening and potentially clear 0 CBV. In the end, wasting 2 clicks for nothing. If these cells here, all of these cells are clear, which will happen over 50% of the time, the benefit of getting the big chord is pretty much lost. So going for the split chord here would usually actually be better. Part 2, opening predictions. One good option, useful for a lot of boards when you don't have any good moves to make, is to look for a potential opening. I covered in an earlier video how to find openings with guaranteed safe clicks when playing for efficiency, but sometimes that isn't an option for us, and we have to go for a guess. Here is an example where we have a potential opening in this bottom section here. Already, we know that these top 3 tiles are all safe, so if these tiles are also safe, we can click on this tile for the opening, assuming that it also is safe, of course. Now, we could go and click the right away and hope for the best, but before committing to it, we can see what we can do to get more info. An opening from here will open up all of these tiles, so we don't want to clear any of these when digging for info, but anything adjacent to these would be very useful. This tile here, for instance, is a good candidate. If we reveal a 1 here, it makes the opening much more likely, and at this point, I would recommend guessing here. And either getting an opening, or if you get a 1, you can flag the only tile the mine could possibly be and go for a nice chord. Let's look at another opening prediction. Here, we have a lot of areas that are closed off, So where should we go for progress? There aren't a lot of good options, so in situations like this, I like to try and go for an opening and hope it expands out to a more favourable area. Looking at this board, our best chances of getting an opening would be this section up here. We have these two tiles that are already safe and 3 surrounding 8% safe squares, so a decent chance of an opening, but not quite high enough to be confident. We can improve our chances by clearing some tiles to the left for some more info. First by clicking this square here, and then, if we get a 2, clearing here as well. Assuming we get another 2, we'll have this board state, and our openings hopes are now much better. At this point, I recommend clicking this tile and hoping for an opening. In general, I recommend going for an opening from a floating cell, like this one, if it's next to at most 2 other floating cells, or else the probability of missing it is a bit too high. But every case is different, so you can judge for yourself what level of risk you're willing to take on. So, what happens if we get a 1 here instead? Well, you could either go for a risky move right away by just guessing one of these cells is a mine and coding it immediately, or if you're a bit more sensible, you can try and solve elsewhere on the board and try and see if you can identify the mine by clearing from the other side. In either case, you'll want to avoid clearing these cells until you can clear them with the chord off of this one. So even when you miss, you can still salvage good efficiency from your failed opening predictions most of the time when you set things up right. Part 3. Setup clicks and lunar chords. In this part, I'm going to go over guesses where we go for a tile that is likely to set up for a nice chord. There are a number of ways to do these with varying ranges of likelihood for them to pay off, but for this video, I'm going to focus on ways to look for opportunities that have at least a decent likelihood of paying off. The first board I'm going to look at involves this section over here. Unlike my previous examples, there isn't any way an opening can be here. But is there still a way to save clicks? Well, the good news is we do have a way. If these cells are all safe, then we could click here and chord off this cell to gain a click. But is it worth doing? Let's have a look at what we know. Already, we know 3 of the relevant tiles are safe. With only 2 unknowns, it's more likely to work out than not. But we don't need to go for it quite yet. Up here, we have a couple of tiles that aren't affected by the chord we want to go for. So we can clear this top one, and the one below it if possible, and that could give us relevant information before we proceed. Ideally, we get a 2 here, and here, to eliminate the possibility of this tile being a mine. So now, our chord only relies on this tile being safe. So we can guess at this point and chord like this, saving 2 clicks over just clicking normally, or 1 click over a method that wouldn't require any guesses that involves clicking one of these tiles first for safety. At this point, we start getting into some guesses that are a little bit higher risk for higher rewards. In this example, we don't have a lot to work with, but there is potential for a big chord if we click here and get a 1. The chance of this chord paying off, based on what we know so far, is pretty low, with so many unknowns around our proposed guess. So, we can again get more information before committing to it. Here, we have a safe tile to clear, and if we get a 2, then our chances of making progress from guessing here are a lot better. And at this point, I'd recommend going for this play. If all goes well, we will get a 1 here and be able to chord to the left, although as always, things may not always go to plan, so it's good to have a backup in mind. Let's say we get a 2 instead. What would we do? Well, one option you could go for is to clear this tile here and hope to be able to get a 1 for the nice chord. If we're lucky, we might get a chord like this, and we'll be able to chord the 2 now with some potential follow-ups as well, like a potential split chord here, or an opening prediction down here. It's important to keep in mind that guesses like this aren't always going to pay off, but if you have an idea of what you want to do to adapt to the most likely outcomes of each guess, you can maintain a high efficiency even in games where you don't always get to play for your first options. The last setup click I want to look at involves this board here. When you encounter situations like this, it can be a good idea to go for a lunar chord, where you try to guess underneath the guaranteed mine and go for a high risk play by uncovering this tile and hoping for a big chord off of a 1. A guess like this isn't super likely to succeed. About 25% of the time you'll get a 1 here, but it can be worth going for if you want to go for a very high efficiency game. One issue that makes lunar chords like this not worth it most of the time is you're very likely to run into an opening down here, even in cases where you are lucky enough to get the 1. So it can be good to try and solve elsewhere first before going for this move to make sure that it doesn't happen. On this bottom left corner here, we have a pretty good move to go for first, with the guaranteed opening on this tile, which could open up the board like this. Now we know that chording this tile up here isn't going to lead into an opening, because we know there are mines down here that will prevent it. So we could proceed with the lunar chord, allowing for a somewhat risky but highly rewarding play. It's not something that pays off all too often, but is worth going for on occasion when an opportunity presents itself to get off to a big start. Part 4. Opening prevention and forced guesses. Sometimes, very occasionally, clearing an area in the fewest clicks isn't necessarily the most efficient way to solve a section of a board. Take this case for example. We can see here that there are 2 possible solutions to this area in the bottom left, with mines either arranged like this or like this. You might think that the best move in this position would be to assume a configuration like this, which forces an opening and allows the section to be cleared in 2 clicks by clearing this tile here and cleaning up, as opposed to the alternative where we flag this tile, chord it, then clear the bottom, requiring an extra click as well as a guess. So why would we consider going for the second option when it's riskier? The answer comes down to forcing a higher 3BV board, which makes our overall efficiency higher in the end by eliminating the possibility of seeing as many openings. In the first scenario, we clear 7 3BVs in this area after spending 2 more clicks, compared to the alternative, which at the cost of an extra click has 12 3BV in the same area. So it's equivalent to a net gain of 4 clicks, which makes it worth taking the risk of the 50-50 in the case where you want to aim for maximum efficiency. Basically, you should make the guess that assumes the board is most favorable to maximize the potential. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about forced guesses. Pretty often, when playing Minesweeper regularly, you encounter a situation where you need to guess, and conventional wisdom states that the best way to deal with a 50-50 or other forced guess when you encounter it is to take it immediately, but that isn't necessarily the case when playing for efficiency. Now, for most forced guesses, you will still want to get them out of the way pretty quickly, but you can occasionally find opportunities to gain an extra click out of a forced guess that warrants working around it, at least temporarily. In this board, we have a forced 50-50 in the bottom left here. Now, we could guess it right away, but there's a chance that clearing some of the area from the other side will allow us to save some clicks. So we can do something like this, and now we have an opportunity to save a click on this 2 here. Because the guess is forced in this case, there's nothing we can do to learn which of these squares is a mine, so the best move is to just flag 1 and chord to continue making progress. Another example, here we have a square that contains a forced diagonal 50-50. If we have a look at the mine probabilities for the tiles around the square, we can see a safe square to the right, next to a few relatively low mine chance tiles, and the 50% tiles to the left. If we uncover it, and get a 2, we can go ahead and flag one of those 50-50 tiles to chord off, because we have to guess one of those anyway. Those were a few ways to approach guessing when playing for efficiency. Don't worry too much about getting the probability exactly right for each scenario. As long as you can get within the right ballpark for each guess, such as knowing whether a tile is approximately 80% likely to be a mine, or if it's closer to 50%, or if it's worse, you should be in a good position to make informed guessing decisions like I do in this video. Another thing to note about this video is that it's primarily focused on playing expert, so a lot of the guessing scenarios will be slightly more dangerous than they would be on average for beginner or intermediate boards. Intermediate efficiency tends to require being a lot more aggressive with the kinds of guesses required to get an exceptionally high efficiency compared to expert, taking advantage of stuff like lunar chords a lot more often than you would need to on Expert. If you have any questions or additional tips for efficiency you'd like to share that I haven't covered in this video, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and subscribe if you'd like to see more Minesweeper videos. If there's anything else efficiency-wise or Minesweeper related in general you'd like to see me cover, let me know, and maybe I'll make a video on it in the future. For now, thank you for watching this one. I hope you found it useful, or at least a little entertaining. If you did, feel free to check out my other efficiency guides if you haven't previously, and good luck on your future sweeping. Goodbye.